Looks like we have some people joining us. That's fantastic. We'll be starting shortly. All right, Charles, you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, sir. Let's get going, please.
12 noon. Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural meeting of the Rotary Coastal Club. This is truly a unique experience for Charles Gagne, our president-elect, and myself, Philip Zimmerman, president of Rotary Coastal. We'd like to welcome you to today's inaugural launch of this new E-Club. It was the brainchild of past District Governor Mike Hayes 2 years ago, who wanted to start an E-Club in the Louisiana District 6200 Rotary International District. And his desire was that we would have a club that would be focused on coastal Louisiana issues, and then, if so warranted, would provide coastal Louisiana expansion into the Texas coast, Mississippi coast, and then throughout the Gulf Coast, including in this club. And so we welcome you today. As part of the Rotary tradition, we will open with the pledge. And so we're going to have a picture of a flag here. If you want to just wherever you're sitting, we welcome you. And I'm just going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and you can join with me in that. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. And then again, in a Rotary tradition, if you're new to Rotary, or if you've been participated in Rotary, or we have what we call the 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. This is the foundation of Rotary. And we'll just go through this. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Very good. And so that takes out the preliminary Rotary things that we do at the beginning of a Rotary meeting. Since this is our inaugural kickoff, as we have more members join us in this adventure online, I do want to say that we truly are an E-Club. I'm located here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Charles Gagne is the mastermind behind the platform. He's in Dularge, Louisiana, which is south of Houma. And today's speaker, Gary Cecchine, he's actually in New Orleans. And so already you can see that the advantage of having an E-Club presence allows you to bring in people from diverse places across the state to come together and discuss coastal Louisiana issues. And I'd like to go ahead and just get right into today's program. And so I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today. It's Gary Cecchine. He is the Director of Research for the RAND Gulf States Policy Institute and a Senior Natural Scientist at the RAND Corporation. He leads and conducts technical and policy research in a range of areas, including energy and environmental policy, coastal protection, emergency preparedness and response, homeland security, and science policy. As our Director of Research, he also develops and coordinates policy research in health, education, economics, public safety, and regional and strategic planning. Gary earned his PhD in biology and public policy from the Georgia Institute of Technology and was a U.S. officer in the infantry and medical service. And today, Gary's going to present a discussion on the economic consequences that land loss could have for Louisiana and the United States in future action based upon a collaborative study by the RAND Corporation and Louisiana State University. And without further ado, Gary, I'll let you go ahead and take it over.
Great, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm sorry, can you hear me all right?
You're fine, good.
I can hear you fine, Gary.
Okay, terrific. I'm not sure this little chat screen is going to get in the way. I don't know what you can see, but anyway, move on. First of all, I'm really honored, especially on your inaugural meeting, to be the speaker today. I'm going to talk just a little bit about who we are for some context, and then walk you through a little project that we've done looking at the effects, the economic effects of the fact that we're losing our coast rapidly, particularly in Louisiana, but across the Gulf states. I want to say at the beginning, though, as we go to this next slide, that you know, the four principles that you put up kind of in a nutshell describes what we do at the RAND Corporation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We say that, and it's true, we're not bipartisan, we're completely nonpartisan. And what we do is objective research to improve policy and decision making. And so I just find it really interesting that the four tenets you put up, if you went to the RAND website and looked at our quality guidelines, they're the same pretty much. So our mission is to improve policy and decision making through research and analysis. RAND started in 1946 as a research project called Project RAND, which at the time was an acronym for Research and Analysis. And it was sponsored by the U.S. Army Air Forces, actually by General Hap Arnold, if you remember the raid on Tokyo at the time. It was developed at Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica, California, which is where our headquarters is today. And of course, at that time, basically the idea was to bring people that had been kind of volunteering their time through the war effort, scientists and strategic thinkers, to bring them into a place where they could continue to do that work without having to either go back to academia or into the civil service. So a lot of people refer to us as the original think tank. So in 1948, we became incorporated with support from the Ford Foundation, actually, as an independent nonprofit research organization. We have a robust research staff. We like to say that it has some of the world's most innovative thinkers. Those would be my friends, maybe more so than me. And we've been at this for a little more than 70 years now. So we have a staff of about 1,900. Of those, about 900 are researchers at the PhD, MD, or JD levels. And we come from 53 different countries, and that accounts for 75 different languages. This is just a quick snapshot of all the types of things we do, everything from health, education, national security, environment. And of course, today we're going to be talking about coastal protection, which is what we do quite a bit of here from our New Orleans office, where I'm the director. This map, as of 2 weeks ago, is already a little bit out of date because we just recently opened an office in Sacramento in Silicon Valley to do technology type issues, obviously. Our headquarters is in Santa Monica. That was by design in 1948. The idea was to put up this think tank in Santa Monica where it would not be within the DC Beltway, as it were, to stay away from those kinds of influences in the military-industrial complex and those sorts of things. We, at any given day, have RAND researchers in more than 250 cities all over the world. And I can tell you that the coastal work that we do here is not limited just to the Gulf Coast. We do similar research, say, in the northeast of the United States. We've done a lot of work since Hurricane Sandy. Also in California and the Colorado River Basin, Vietnam, Peru, Africa. So all over the world we're applying this kind of research I'll be talking to you about today. I'll give you just a little idea of what we do here at the RAND Gulf States Policy Institute, based here in New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina, as you know, August 29th, 2005. We got a phone call from the governors in the affected states who said, you know, we think we're going to need help to recover from this. And also we have other issues that we can deal with. And so RAND immediately invested $3 million of our own funds into immediate research. We opened an office in Jackson, Mississippi, because New Orleans was underwater at the time. And then in October 2006, we moved to New Orleans, and we've been in the same office since. And the idea here is that we now have the opportunity to bring those 800 or 900 researchers to this region to do research that matters to our neighbors here in the Gulf states. And I'll be happy to talk to any of you about more of that, but that's the sales pitch. So let me move on a little bit to what we're talking about today. This is a project we did looking at the issue of the fact that we're losing land, particularly in Louisiana. And for those of you that follow this particular issue, this map will look familiar to you. It has become known as the map. And you can see, you know, the red areas are places that are basically disappearing as we speak, and I'll talk more about that. So we have a very invaluable coast, but it's also very fragile, and it's been degrading rapidly for decades. If anyone's interested, we can talk about the history of that a little bit, but it basically started with the 1927 flood in New Orleans, where it was decided that the river should be channelized so that wouldn't happen again. There was some other issues about blowing up levees to protect more privileged, as we might say, populations than others. But what that really meant was we were losing all the sediment that came out of the river to build the delta that we have. Add to that the issues, and you can see in this photo a lot of the canals that were built for oil and gas exploration, and there's an estimated 30,000 miles of those, which just add to the erosion problem we're having. So a couple numbers here. We've lost almost 2,000 square miles up until 2010 from when we started channelizing the river. We're expecting to lose, and that's actually a lowball estimate, around another 2,000 2050. Since we're in the Gulf South, we always put this in football terms. So we lose about a football field's worth of land every 90 minutes on the Louisiana coast. For those of you that are interested, this particular photo is looking east. This is what they call the funnel, or the V, where Hurricane Katrina's floodwaters were directed into New Orleans. And it's the juncture of two canals. So on the upper right is the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, the MRGO, which has been closed now. It heads southeast, feeds into the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway, which is more or less across the lower center of the photograph. So, as many of you I'm sure know, there's a coastal master plan. There's one now for 2017, which is under review, which we've done a lot of support with, as we did with the 2012 Coastal Master Plan, which is a $50 billion plan. Some estimates are actually going to cost about $107 billion to implement, but this plan was passed unanimously by the state legislature in 2012, which is kind of a remarkable feat. The question is, though, which was unaddressed in the 2012 plans, we don't really know what the economic impacts are to the Gulf Coast and the nation because of coastal land loss. That was, frankly, just pardon the pun, a kind of a bridge too far during the 2012 plan. And so we were asked to conduct this study. So in the 2012 plan, it affects 24 parishes in Louisiana that are subject to substantial land loss in the near future, and actually ongoing now, which supports about 2.5 million people at risk, with a lot of businesses, not only that are important to Louisiana and to the Gulf Coast, but also to the rest of the nation. And consider that, you know, these are major transportation hubs, these recreational and cultural facilities, the key tourist places. And so what we were asked to do in coordination with LSU was to say, okay, if we don't do anything, if we don't implement this plan under future scenarios, what could this cost us being, you know, the Gulf community, and also cost the nation? And so we did an empirical evaluation of these economic damages done in a future, quote unquote, without action. That is, without a concerted restoration and protection efforts to minimize or mitigate this land loss. We identified the value of economic assets and economic activities, which are different things, as I'll explain, that are most at risk in two future horizons, one 25 and one 50 years ago. This says from now, but obviously the study took a couple years to do. And we do this against two different scenarios, one being the moderate scenario of land loss, and you can see that on the bottom left, which is still fairly drastic if you consider all the stuff that's colored in red there is going to go away. And then a less optimistic scenario which includes land loss as it exists now, increased flooding due to a decrease in natural storm surge protection, and also sea level rise. Now, I would point out to you a couple of caveats before we go further. One is the 2017 plan basically has the less optimistic scenario as the baseline at this point going forward. So, and I hate to, be the doomsday speaker, but basically what this means is that it's not going to get any better from here. Okay, we'll just move on here. My other caveat to you is I am not an economist. I am a coastal ecologist and a biologist. But you can't swing a cat at RAND without hitting some economists. And so we had some really good resource economists working on this project. And so I will kind of gloss over a little bit the methodology of this. If you would like more details, I can provide those to you or even introduce you to the economists that actually did the study. But the idea here is we went through 4 steps. And the first one was to determine land loss and economic projections that would enable the research team, that's us, to explore the economic impacts across these different time horizons. So we focused on the existing economic landscape. That is not the one that's going to be in the future, but what we actually have today. And that allowed us to reduce the assumptions on the future state of the economy, which gets really messy. And we utilized land loss and storm surge projections that were actually used in the 2012 Coastal Master Plan to then reduce future assumptions on future natural conditions. So, like with most of these kinds of studies, there is a good deal of uncertainty, but by focusing on what exists today and what we might lose today, we were able to reduce a lot of that uncertainty. So we looked at these 24 parishes that are subject to the substantial land loss from the 2012 plan, which support 2.5 million people. These parishes produce and export goods for the region and the nation. They receive a lot of goods for export from the nation. They're major transportation hubs, and as I mentioned, they key recreational, cultural, tourism facilities that attract visitors across the globe. And so the question was, what happens if these things go away? What is that actually going to cost? You'll see a number 3 and 4 there that gets a little more detailed into the kind of metric analysis and what we do at RAND, which is far future planning. And we do this by scenario modeling, which is, in a nutshell, very high intensive computing, basically. So we run thousands and thousands of future scenarios through our supercomputers to kind of come up, with what this is going to be. So from here on, if there are no questions at this point, I'm going to just kind of give you a nutshell of the results that we came up with. So what we found is that the most structures that are going to be affected are not people's homes, they're non-residential structures, which should not be surprising, because if you think about the Gulf Coast, particularly around the mouth of the Louisiana River, you're looking at a lot of commerce, a lot of warehousing, a lot of shipping. And basically what we find is that between 60 and 75% of the costs due to land loss are associated with these non-residential, non-home structures. And it's about 1,200 structures at risk in the least optimistic 50-year case, which is on your right, which then becomes a total of about $3.5 billion that we're looking to lose because of land loss. And this is based on replacement costs, which are not annual, but instead reflect the total replacement costs of capital stock at risk. And also, I should point out, this does not include estimates related to things such as pipeline infrastructure or rail infrastructure, because we just couldn't find accurate cost estimates for those. Part of that is based on the way GIS mapping and the things that we were able to use work. But I can tell you we're working on that now and hope to have an update that will match the 2017 master plan. And I can just tell you that the number of those bars could go up. So the question is, what could we lose? I'm going to have to close this window here. And just for the sake of argument, considering that the 2017 plan has the less optimistic scenario from 2012 is now kind of the baseline. Let's just look at the bottom line. We're talking about in coastal Louisiana at least 1,200 establishments at risk, which equates to a little over 12,000 jobs and about $3.1 billion in sales volume annually. Uh-oh, hold on. There we go. Sorry. Okay. So then one of the other things we did in our models is we said, so what if there's one particular storm that happens, and think of Hurricane Katrina or even larger storm. We actually modeled it on Katrina at a level 3 hurricane. We can talk about the credence that you put into those level estimates at a different time. I want to point out to you, this, what we're looking at now, this is incremental damage. So if you think about Katrina, and estimates range widely, but 50 billion is a pretty close one in the median about what could be lost. This is in addition to that 50 billion. What would happen if we had another Katrina if we don't stop the coastal erosion in Louisiana? And you'll notice that the bars on the far right in the 50-year scenario are much higher than the ones on the left. And the reason for that is the ones on the left assume that the $16 billion that was spent to protect the New Orleans area after Katrina will continue to hold for at least 25 years, assuming that we keep up the maintenance costs and those kinds of things. The ones on the right include some scenario runs that suggest that those levees will be overtopped again. So worst case scenario here is you start with a baseline of about 50 billion in 2005 dollars. You add close to 135 billion for an eastern storm track in 50 years in the less optimistic scenario if we don't stop stop coastal erosion, including sea level rise and the lack of these buffers, these natural buffers that we used to have that we're losing. So here's the worst case scenario. The least optimistic scenario at 50 years, which by the way is now the baseline scenario for the 2017 plan, is we're looking at 26,000 establishments. By that we mean businesses. This is non-residential. About 320,000 employees probably out of a job because of that. And that loses $23 billion in sales, which is a more complicated calculation than I care to get into, but I can try to explain. That's just from Louisiana alone. And we're also looking at long-term disruptions of about 6.4 billion in wage income for the Gulf Coast. So what's really important to understand about this, and what we try to do at RAND, is we're trying to inform policy nationally and internationally, not just here in Louisiana, is that, recognizing that, we are one of the great gateways of commerce for the entire nation. There's a lot of economic activity outside of Louisiana that also could be lost. There's a couple things here. Activity directly at risk refers to just the effect of coastal land loss. That is, think about businesses, warehouses, rail lines, pipelines that will be underwater because sea level rise and coastal erosion. $3 billion, 14,000 jobs, nearly $1 billion in wages. And then if there's another storm, you add to that incrementally another 15 billion in output, 78,000 more jobs, and another 4.6 billion in wages. We also kind of did and I wouldn't say this is back of the envelope, but I mean, there was a lot of modeling that went into this, but I caveat this a little bit because you never really know. There's a lot of international politics at play here, but we're also thinking that you can be somewhere in the mid $2.5 billion range just from gasoline price spikes in the United States alone. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of refinery activity that happens on the Gulf Coast. So on that note also, almost half of the activity that really is at risk because of coastal land loss in Louisiana actually takes place outside of Louisiana. So if you look at the less optimistic scenario at 25 and 30 years, we're looking at 30 to 40,000 jobs being lost, and almost half of those, about 40%, are actually upstream or upriver from Louisiana because of our coastal land loss. This does not call into account any incident of a particular storm in the future. This is just because we're losing land. And then, not to belabor the point too much, but if you then extrapolate some of this, and extrapolation is too loose of a term because there's actually a lot of analysis that goes into this. We're looking at economic activity nationwide from one storm that looks like Katrina can top $50 billion on top of the estimates from the Katrina storm, which was about $50 billion in 2005 dollars. So basically, we're doubling our risk here. So I know I kind of blown through this. I want to leave time for questions, but this is my last slide here. Just to sum this up, excuse me, just from land loss, you're looking at, up to $3.5 billion in assets, because think of these things are things that are just going to be underwater in the future. Up to about $7.5 billion in economic activities, because you lose those things that are underwater. And then if we have another storm that looks like Katrina, we could be looking at $133 billion in asset loss and about $51 billion in economic activity loss. Now, there are probably a lot of other risks here, and we're working on those. They're a little difficult to quantify because of the uncertainty, but these are things that we're currently doing research on at RAND and LSU now, looking at things like the fishery industry and the tourism industry, and what happens when you lose the lower half of Louisiana. And the uncertainty is very high, I would just say at this point, because you could probably still get shrimp. You just might have to go farther to get it, et cetera. And then the question is, from a policy perspective, is we're watching land loss happen, in front of us, and it's a gradual process, but it's a predictable process. It's a modelable process. And what do you do about it? And is the cost that you're putting into the master plans to do, diversions and to build land and to stop this land loss, worth what it costs? So, and that's all I have. I wanted to leave some time for comments. So,
thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
That was a great presentation. I wanted to say that if anyone does have a question, at the top of your Join Me screen is a series of bubbles, and the second bubble from the left is a chat bubble. If you press that, it'll open up a chat screen, and you can type in a question for Gary, and it'll appear really, I think, on everybody's screen. So, let's see if anyone has any questions. I don't see any chat questions coming in, but I do have a question for you, Gary. Well, there you go. Here's one from Charles. What projects are underway that may have a near-term impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are hundreds of projects that are included in the master plans. All of them have kind of different purposes. One of the interesting things about the master plan, both for 2012 and 2017, is it's very equally balanced between coastal protection, that is, the building of levees and structures and those kinds of things to protect us from the next Katrina. And then the other half of it is coastal restoration, where we're building diversions and things that move sediment from the Mississippi River and other rivers, actually, the Chapalaya for one, that will build land out, in the bayous and in the marshes that do two things. They stop our coastal land loss. They combat, the effects of sea level rise, and they also act as natural buffers against storms. And so there's thankfully a very good mix of those kinds of things that are happening. Some of them are kind of more dramatic, for lack of a better word, than others. But I think, the latest estimates from the coastal geologists and others is that a lot of them are not going to be enough. And so, while I appreciate the question, I think a larger question is, so how do you adaptively manage this new, the new future? And the new future is that we're going to lose a lot of coast. And what is that going to mean? And at what point do we as a society and as a community of coastarians, if I can use that term, start migrating north? I mean, that's really the big policy question.
And in the decision for those persons who will be migrating north, I imagine that in the discussion of who gets protected and who gets left out behind the levee or in front of the levee, in the face of the ongoing land loss, I imagine that can be a discussion and passionate as well.
Well, it already has been. I mean, there are a couple communities that have been asked to migrate already. I mean, and these are small communities so far. But what's interesting from a policy perspective is that a lot of this is still being done at the state and regional level at this point, and so we're not seeing a federal action on this at this point. And there can be some debate about whether that would even be appropriate to do. But how do you listen? 80% of the population lives near a flooding source, and so if you move these folks, how do you not move other folks? And it's interesting. There was a design competition done recently called Changing Course, of which, in full disclosure, Rand was a part. We were one of the three winning teams, and a lot of the discussion in that, which was focused on how do we maybe change what the geography looks like by engineering of the Mississippi River and of the Louisiana coast. And if we do that, what happens to all those people that are affected? Do you incentivize them to move? Do you just assume that over a multitude of generations they're just going to naturally migrate north? And who knows? But I can tell you, and I can't speak for the Corps of Engineers, but I think they would tell you that there are a lot of projects that are going on right now that are doing really good things to restore the coast. But most coastal scientists would tell you it's probably not enough.
Lee has a question here. Does RAND factor in improvements, completion, levees, diversions of the master plan, and calculate these improvements into the land loss calculations?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can go back to the chart if you want. So if you remember the one chart that talked about the incremental increase in damage from storms, there was the 25-year and the 50-year. And in the 25-year, we absolutely include all of those improvements. And it doesn't look too bad, although, if you think $12 billion on top of $50 billion is not too bad. And then at the 50-year, we assumed at that time because it was the worst case scenario, we assumed at that time that you would have levee breaches that might be similar to, but not as high as Hurricane Katrina. I can tell you in separate RAND research that I did not present today, we've done a lot of flood risk modeling based on a model that we call the Coastal Louisiana Risk Assessment Model, or CLARA. We did that before and after the $15 billion enhancement to the protection system around New Orleans proper, and basically showed that New Orleans itself, by and large, will not flood again like it did after Katrina if the maintenance is maintained on the new protection system that's put in place. And I would say on a personal note, based on that research, I bought a house in the Broadmoor region of New Orleans, which is known as the Bowl. And the house I bought, which was built 102 years ago, took on 14 feet of water in Katrina.
Ooh.
Yeah. So we certainly account for those, but we also We also have to run model simulations that consider the fact that, what happens if you lose the funding to maintain those levees.
Very good. Wade's asking, can you provide some clarity on the relations between RAND and the Water Institute?
Yeah, happy to. The Water Institute of the Gulf, I assume you mean.
Yes,
So we have been funded from CPRA for more than a decade now to do all the modeling that led to the 2012 and the 2017 master plan. As I don't know if all of you know the history, but the Water Institute wasn't exactly a spinoff of CPRA, but was set up as a separate entity to kind of be, for lack of a better term, kind of a think tank and a repository for all of these great minds like Denise Reed, who's the director of science at the Water Institute, and Justin Aaronworth, who just took over as the CEO. And we consult with them. We are not, with very few exceptions, and by that I mean like one-offs, we do workshops and stuff. We are not directly funded by the Water Institute, but we work with them as partners for some extramural funding to do things like work with some of the agencies that are doing post-Hurricane Sandy recovery and those kinds of things.
Very good.
Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, he said,
Thanks. Yeah.
Got Charles's question there, where the estimates of the restoration may favor the coastal regions economically. Will new work or investment be forthcoming that may benefit Louisiana? So it's all this work that's going on to restore the coast. What kind of economic benefit is that going to be for the state? That's
a terrific question. It's not the one that we've studied in that way, because that would be kind of a labor economics and infrastructure economics kind of question. What I would say is that, anytime you put $50 billion into a state to do restore and recovery, restore and protection operations, obviously, that's benefiting somebody. I mean, there are engineering firms and others that are taking those contracts and employing people to do that. But we haven't done that study to say, for example, and this would be a great policy question, I think, to look at, is that an economic prompt more so than, say, rebuilding highways? Don't know.
That's a very good question. Lee's asking, do you have more detailed studies that focus on individual parishes and communities?
In terms of coastal restoration and protection, not so much. But in terms of community resilience and emergency preparedness, yeah, we have quite a bit. And actually, if you go to rand.org/pubs, you can search our database, which has 20,000 publications dating back to 1946, and 98% of them are available for free download. And if you ever find one that's not, send me an email and I'll get it to you. And by the way, the very first publication in 1946 was the feasibility of using a manned spacecraft to orbit the Earth, which was, 8 years before Sputnik?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. There are a few crazy ones out there. There's that one. There's one that some RAND engineers in the 1950s figured out that if you dug a hole between New York and LA through the center of the Earth, you could traverse that period in 33 seconds if you didn't burn up on the way. So we got some crazy ones out there. I encourage you to go to the website and search. But to answer this question more specifically, you can go there and put in terms like Louisiana and communities and community resilience. And by the way, if you go to Google right now and Google community resilience, RAND is the #1 hit. And the reason for that is we developed a bunch of tools all over the nation for community resilience, and then we provided all of them for free to community leaders and policymakers.
Fantastic. We got one last question. This one's from Wade. Are there available definable goals of success for the restoration project? And is there enough sediment to be successful?
Let me answer the second question first. There's absolutely enough sediment to be successful if you look at the load that's coming through the Mississippi River. The problem with that is that we don't have a way to get it to the places it needs to be. So we are still dredging and dumping more sediment off the continental shelf than we're depositing into the areas that need it and that got it before we rechanneled the river after the 1927 flood. Definable goals of success for restoration, I think, is kind of in the eye of the beholder. As a coastal ecologist, I would say that those definable goals go beyond, what you see in the Clean Water Act of fishable and swimmable, which is completely unquantifiable. It would be more, do we have a sustainable ecosystem that supports the fisheries the way they were, 100 years ago and before we started rechanneling the river. This is a question that comes up all the time, doing environmental impact studies and all the things that the Corps has to do, bless their hearts, before they embark on these things. And there just really are no metrics. There's no way to say, is dumping 20 tons of sediment into the marsh better than dumping 5 tons of sediment? And then what indicators do you use? I would tell you that coastal ecologists use some indicators, such as the vegetation. Are the thalassia grasses coming back? I mean, we've totally denuded the cypress forest because of salinity issues. But those are those are ecological indicators, and I can't really speak to the engineering indicators. I don't know how much sediment is enough. It's a great question, though.
Very good. Thank you, Gary, for your time. And Charles, if you will go over with our viewers how they can, if you'd like to apply for membership to eRotary Coastal, we'd love to have you as a member and join us as we collaborate together from a diverse individuals with diverse backgrounds to address coastal issues that are important to us all. Charles, if you can show on the website where they would go to do that. It's an Apply Now button on our homepage. And then secondarily, secondarily, if you're a Rotarian and you need to make a makeup meeting, we actually do have a spot on our webpage that Charles will show you where you can click and get a form that you'll fill out that you attended today's meeting. You'll get an email that will verify that. And then you submit that to your club secretary or your sergeant at arms, and you will get makeup credit for this meeting. So Charles, I'll let you take it away, and I'll let you close this out, Charles.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip. Well, great. Well, first of all, thanks to everybody for joining us today. This is a new initiative, and just like when Rand gathered around a conference table back in the 40s, that's kind of where we are right now. So we are most grateful for your interest and participation today. We are actively inviting you and others in the community to join us. If you are a Rotarian, you already understand why we're doing this. If you're not a Rotarian, our motto is service above self. We take that very literally. And you will see our club actively involved in coastal projects. I mean, you'll see physical, hands-on type things. Rotary also is an international organization, so we already have the attention of the globe, actually, in what we're doing right here. But to be part of Rotary is very simple. You'll need to apply now. Here's a very simple form. Certainly, it is an application that will be considered, but I'll tell you that we are certainly open to people that are interested in what we're doing. We will meet every other week at the moment on a Thursday, all online, although there will be times when we will physically come together, either as an entire club or in groups in conjunction with other Rotary clubs. Very simple. Our dues are very low. There are $200 a year if you're interested, which is fractional to what a typical Rotary club might be. But anyway, the application is right here under the Apply Now button. If you are an existing Rotarian, you know that we are all eligible for makeup meetings. And that's a simple thing of just coming to the meeting page and then clicking at the very end. And here's a very simple form that fills out. When this form is completed, it will automatically generate an email to you that you can bring to your club secretary as confirmation of your attendance today. But we thank you for coming, and we encourage you to please share this information with thought leaders, policy leaders, anybody who has an interest and who doesn't have an interest right now in these issues. We are most grateful to Rand and to Gary for joining us today. And we thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Y'all have a great day. And that concludes our meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks.